Welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered with Perry Clark. This program looks at mental health from unique perspectives and shows you how to manage your life by finding the knots that help you and stay away from the ones that could be a disadvantage. Now, here is your host, Perry Clark.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Untying Knots. This is going to be the first of a special set of podcasts we're doing for the month of June, which is Pride Month. Ideally, I should have done this for February as well, but planning caught up with me, and I have the luxury to put this up. So I want to start with the aspects of the disclaimer, which is the reminder that this is a podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes. This does not constitute a work with a licensed mental health professional. I do recommend you see one that is in your area to work on your unique issues. Now, you may also find that my voice sounds a little off today. That's because I just got back from being at the dentist and I'm waiting for the Novocaine and all of that to finish wearing off. So that's what, if I sound a little off before. So today I'm interviewing a gentleman that I met, oh God, I think it was probably back in 2013 or maybe 2012. 2020 or 2014 during one of the Association of Black Psychologists conventions I was attending. And we have kept a rapport going off all throughout the years, as well as the work and recognition around the work of dealing with Black mental health, especially LGBT Black mental health, and the use of the work that this individual is doing to push that further in resources, which are going to be useful for others to develop more material. So I have the honor of talking with Jonathan Lassiter, PhD. He's a polymath who utilizes psychology, writing, and dance to help others heal and thrive. His roles include licensed clinical psychologist, holistic wellness and relationship coach, professor, author, public speaker, and choreographer. As a public intellectual, Dr. Lassiter has been featured on television, radio, podcasts, and print as PBS, SiriusXM, and The Hill. Dr. Lassiter is an award-winning co-editor of Black LGBT Health in the United States, an intersection of race, gender, and sexual orientation. His book received the Gay and Lesbian Medical Association Achievement Award. It is the first and only text to focus solely on Black LGBT Americans' holistic health. He is currently working on his first sole author book that will explore contemporary issues of race and mental health in the United States. In addition, Dr. Lassiter has published numerous articles in academic journals and lay publications, presented his choreographic work in prestigious showcases in New York City, and provided psychological services to clients in medical centers across the country. Currently, Dr. Lassiter is the assistant professor of psychology at Rowan University, founder and chief psychological officer at Lassiter Health Initiative, co-host of Fly on the Wall, the YouTube, and artistic associate at the Black Acting Method Studio. Welcome, Dr. Lassiter.
Thank
or
you.
should I just say Jonathan?
You just say Jonathan. We know each other. It's fine. We don't have to be so formal. But no, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be in conversation with you today.
Well, thank you for coming. So as the first question, how did you get here?
How did I get here? I'm gonna interpret that broadly, but I must say that question immediately makes me think of Deborah Cox. How did you get here? So I'm just like, that's in my head. But anyway, how did I get here? That's a very good question. First, I think about where is here? And, and for me here in this moment, I am in a good place. I'm in a good place right now. If you would have talked to me 2 months ago, I was tired, I was burned out. But early January, I had a really good vacation. And so now I'm all rejuvenated and I am back energized and ready to go. And so I'm in a good place. How did I get here? I got here through rest. I got here through resting.
Which is, for many, is considered a controversial issue, given our history in this country and the perception of who we are, even worldwide.
Say more about that. What do you mean?
Well, put it this way: there isn't, as we know in this country, the issue of the idea of the lazy Black person,
True, 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 true.
and that we're not necessarily willing to work.
Ah,
But as classically has been said, the issue became when we weren't willing to work for free anymore.
mhm.
And then, two, what would be said about how we are evolving ourselves worldwide, depending on where we are in the diaspora, which is, again, still an aspect of how much are we still climbing out of everything that happened that caused the diaspora, let alone the effects on our ancestral homelands across the continent. So for us to rest is something that some would say is like you're supposed to be working all the time.
Ah, yeah, and I think that's part of the trap, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the trap that we as Black people, I'm thinking about Dr. Kobe Kambone's work around cultural misorientation. I think that's a cultural misorientation because if we think about pre-colonial Afrocentric values and our conceptualizations of time, we don't think of time in this linear sense. And really it was structured around our activities, our rituals. But those things had an ending.
Mm-hmm.
There was a time to rest. There was a time to work. There was a time to celebrate. There was a time to plan. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so this sort of constant work mode is not indigenous to who we are as Black people, and it does not serve us or anyone in society, regardless of racial background. But I think as Black people, in this effort to prove and to serve, I should say, to prove ourselves to others, we have drank the Kool-Aid in a lot
Mm-hmm.
of senses. And so it's a process of unlearning. And I myself have been consciously unlearning. I was talking to a friend earlier today, and I used to pressure myself when I was
Mm-hmm.
tired. Oh, you should be doing, especially going through graduate school, you should be studying, you should be doing this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And now when I'm tired, I no longer try to necessarily figure out why I'm tired. I just sit my behind down.
Exactly.
Because I know I deserve that. I
Mm-hmm.
deserve to be able to sit down because guess what? Our ancestors didn't have the choice.
Mm-hmm.
If they sat down, there goes the whip,
Mm-hmm.
right? If they sat down, they could be fired, and that was their only way of making any sort of livelihood for themselves and their families. And we still have some people, depending on the level of autonomy that people have in their job, who
Mm-hmm.
still feel that very real pressure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
However, I'm at a place, thank God, thank the ancestors, where if I'm tired, I can sit down. And so I do. And so that's where I say, how did I get here today? Rest. I listened to my body and I sat my behind down.
Beautiful. Very beautiful. So, as we've talked talked about what the general aspects of our culture has been dealing with, now let's talk especially what going on for this month that this is going to be heard for. How has LGBT fit into that equation as well, or not?
Oh yeah, definitely. It definitely fits into that equation. I identify as a Black, same gender loving man.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very intentional about the term same gender loving and as opposed to gay.
Mm-hmm.
That is not to say that I have any particular critique of how others choose to identify. But for me, same gender loving is specific in tying it to Black culture
Mm-hmm.
and into tying it to its Afrocentric roots, because that word gay, as we know it today, did not exist pre-colonial Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Same-sex attractions did, of course, right?
Mm-hmm.
Same-sex behaviors did, of course. But that word did not exist. And so for me, same gender loving is the way that I think about, again, the particularity of who I am and my identity. And as Cleo Monago, who coined the term, talks about, is this focus on the loving aspect. Because too often in popular imagination, the gay, the LGBT can it can get tied up in a hyper focus on the genitals.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even when we look at research, I was trained as a HIV prevention scientist researcher. Most of the research in that area is about how using condoms and PrEP, right?
Mm-hmm.
HIV prevention. And so that loving is intentional. It's an intentional reclamation of the core of who I am as a Black man who is attracted to other men, right? And so when we talk about culture, we talk about rest and where the LGBTQ comes in and intersects with the Black, it's all there together. And LGBTQ people, Black LGBTQ people, have that double whammy of not only having this pressure to be a certain way because you're trying to get away from the stereotypes of Blackness, but some of us have internalized a message that because we are LGBTQ or same gender loving, that we are somehow flawed or not good enough or damaged in some way, and therefore our work becomes a way of compensating. And so then that drives our overwork and our use of work to prove something to someone else instead of work as a way to fulfill a purpose, a spirit given purpose, instead of work as a way to unify us with our spiritual mission in life, which is a different thing.
And it's not a context that would have fit nicely in colonialism.
No.
Especially when the idea is, our sense of freedom. And I think this also ties into a degree to what you talked about with Dr. Natalie Jones on her podcast, talking about narcissism in the LGBT and the same gender loving spectrum as well, which I do recommend folks who are interested go listen to that. I'll try to put a link in the show notes if possible. But that standpoint of just how much even that maladaptiveness has become sort of a normalized beyond just what you were mentioning.
Yeah, it definitely. First off, shout out to Dr. Natalie Jones. We went to graduate school together. I love her. If I remember back, because it was a while ago, but so many people reference that talk, which I'm always surprised about. I'm happy so many people can get a lot out of it. But when I think back to that talk, I believe that I was trying to highlight the ways in which narcissism becomes in some ways adaptive for Black LGBTQ people. I think it's about Black LGBTQ men, Black gay and bisexual men in particular in that podcast. But it becomes adaptive in this because they're trying to prove something, because they must be the best, because they have to prove their worth. So look at me, the spotlight, because there has not been a bi-directional intimacy, that when someone does show them some sort of attention, there's this sort of knee-jerk reaction to hoard that, because when will I get it again? And to sort of take up all the space and suck all the oxygen out of the room due to some sort of sense of innate deprivation. Because of the messages of society that has communicated something's wrong.
No. Because I know I often say the bad bitch mentality is nice in moments, but it's not a good long-term life strategy. It is so not the and it's also, you love it as long as it's being directed at something else outside of you. You don't love it when it's directed at you. So,
and people don't know how to turn that off. You don't know how to turn it off, and you can't have you can't have an intimate, vulnerable relationship with a bad bitch. A bad bitch is boss. A bad bitch is running things, and that can be great professionally, but it's going to wreak havoc on your interpersonal relationships.
Very much so, and depending on the variety of relationships you have to have. because it's not just that standpoint of, like you said, being the boss. It's how do you also be the the fellow. How do you be appear to be equals? Sorry, I'm still stumbling over some words there. To be an equal, to be a parent, be a child, because a parent does not also always have to be about the power.
Mm-hmm.
It can be about the mentoring,
right, and the supportive role.
mm-hmm.
How can you be a support? Right, the bad bitch needs to be in the spotlight,
Mm-hmm.
but a child, a partner, needs someone to be on the side of them.
Mm-hmm.
You know who you talk to. Maybe some people might say behind, but definitely on to be in this thing with them, not above them.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Very much so. Very
Mm-hmm.
much so. So I'm going to throw this segue in here. You've mentioned a lot of the work that you've mentioned a number of names that have done in research, and I'm kind of curious for both the educational purposes for people who might be thinking about this as a future, but also understand the importance of the work you do. How does research play into this?
Yeah, research is essential, and I want to say research broadly defined.
Mm-hmm.
Because I am currently, as you said, assistant professor at Rowan University. I identify as a health inequities researcher, trying to understand why we see the differences in health, typically more negative health outcomes for Black people, Black LGBTQ, same-gender loving people than we see for their Black heterosexual and their white LGBTQ counterparts. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where my research focused. But since 2014, when I met you actually at the Association of Black Psychologists, that was really a turning point for me in terms of research and really my identity as a psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
Then I was in my last year of my doctoral program. I was actually on internship at the Indianapolis VA, and the convention was in Indianapolis that year. But I did a presentation. I did a research presentation at that conference around. I was describing. I did a national study with Black same-gender loving men, and I was looking at their religious and spiritual participation and beliefs. And I was presenting on some findings from that research. And
Mm-hmm.
guess who was in the back? Dr. Wade Nobles was in the back of my talk. And during the Q&A, he said to me, "What makes this Black psychology?" And at that time, I was like, "What do you mean it's Black? It's about Black people? What do you
Right.
mean by Black psychology?" And he said, "Well, Black psychology is a thing. It's not just about, your sample is you studying Black people, but it's a thing. It's a discipline. People have come before you. Scholars have done this work." And long story short, at the time, I was like, "I don't know what you mean," but of course, I was a little, as my father would say, butt hurt. I was a little hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Felt a little attacked. But then I said, "No, let me go and figure out what Black psychology is." And I
Mm-hmm.
did, and then you see this shelf back here, but these are seminal texts
Mm-hmm.
by Black psychologists.
And just remember, this is an audio podcast.
Oh, yes, that's right. So behind me, folks, is a bookshelf
Mm-hmm.
with a bunch of books that are by pioneering Black psychologists, more in the radical school of thought. So people who were trying to completely emancipate their work from white people's psychology,
Mm-hmm.
simply. And I went and I did that work. And so now I can say my work really is rooted in Black psychology, and that I'm very much interested in how people understand themselves as spiritual beings,
Mm-hmm.
and how we go about not only understanding ourselves in that way, but thriving as spiritual beings, and how that permeates our physical lives, our relationships, etc. So to
Mm-hmm.
get back to your question about research is required. It is required. It is required for us to find true liberation. I
Mm-hmm.
was listening to Nicole Hannah Jones recently talk about the 1619 Project, and there's so many great things about the 1619 Project. But my main critique of it is that it locates the origin story of Black people and trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And Black people existed long before 1619.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally believe, and this comes out of my research, this comes out of my clinical practice, that if Black people are to heal, we must move beyond reacting to trauma from chattel slavery and even contemporary oppression and violence that we experience, and reclaim those pre-colonial values and ways of being and that connection with our spirit. So that is the role that research and education plays, because I must first understand that there is a heritage that predates 1619 that I can draw upon. But the only way I understand that if I go and do that work and do that research.
And one of those steps is also honoring our need to rest. Very much so. Now, with what you've talked about with the books and this process and the aspect of being steward in trauma, your book, the Black, that you're one of the co-authors of, the Black LGBT Health History or Health in the United States, intersection of race and gender and sexual orientation, also is the only one so far as we, at the time that it was published, talking about Black same gender relationships. So why is there such a lack of research in that area as well?
I'm smiling. I'm smiling because I'm sure the answer is obvious to you and you're asking for your audience, right? And so that's why I'm smiling, because I'm like, the reason why is because it is the people who have made their careers studying Black LGBTQ folks, 9 times out of 10 are not from that community. They are white heterosexual, 9 times out of 10 white gay men. White gay men who are writing $1 million grants to the NIH and having them funded and conducting large national studies. And they include, for 11%, if you're lucky, some include an entirely Black LGBTQ same gender loving sample. But those stories, the topics that they're choosing to focus on, are based from their cultural worldview.
And gets focused on the genitals as well.
Overwhelmingly focused on genitals, HIV prevention. Pretty much NIH only wants to fund HIV prevention when it comes to LGBTQ people, especially Black gay, bisexual, same gender loving men and Black trans women. And so when you say why isn't that work there, one, because it's not profitable from an NIH standpoint, not looking holistically. Two, as I said, most of the people who have access to the sort of academic spheres are not Black LGBTQ people, and that's for a lot of different reasons. And so my co-editor, Dr. Lords Follins, and I were very intentional when we said we want this book to be for us, by us. And we wanted to not only focus on the genital sexual risk, HIV prevention, we wanted to not only focus on the risk, what's going wrong, but we want to share the story of what's going well in our communities. We want to share the stories of how we help each other thrive in our communities. Because quite frankly, that's the life we live. Yes, there are challenges. Yes, we see pain and suffering, but we also see joy.
Which is very much getting into the aspect of trying to look at therapy and mental health from a strengths perspective, as opposed to always the weakness, the pathology, which so much of, let's be frank, so much of therapy and mental health has been based off of, because it's built out of the medical model.
Yep.
And when I say medical model, I'm talking about biological science, the repairing of bones, repairing of muscle tissue, all of which every person on this world is functions in that same way, will knit itself together. But our mental health, on the other hand, is a much broader spectrum.
Yes, definitely.
Hmm. Oh. And how did you two guys come together to make this book beyond the aspect of creating material that was for us, by us?
Yeah. Yeah, so Dr. Lord Spallins and I met each other in 2011. Had just finished up all of my coursework in graduate school because I did my PhD out at California School of Professional Psychology in San Francisco, and it took 3 years to finish all the in classroom work,
Mm-hmm.
and then I had to finish my dissertation and my internship. And before going on internship, I was working on my dissertation, but it was like I can do that anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
That entire time I had been in a long distance relationship, and so I was like, I'm gonna move back to New York because that's where my boyfriend was. And so, but before I moved back to New York, I decided to do this conference. This called the Research Training Intensive that the American Psychological Association had. It was around research methods with racial and ethnic diverse groups. So
Mm-hmm.
I decided to do that on my way east. And Dr. Lord Spallins was there, and she immediately made an impression on me. She seemed to be someone that knew her stuff, and if you was going to open up your mouth in front of her, you best become correct, right? And so I was like very impressed, and so we struck up a friendship. And then when I found myself in New York, she was based in New York, and she was a professor at that time at Kingsborough College. And so I remember asking her to look at my CV because I was looking for jobs and while I was working on my dissertation. And then a few months after that meeting in New York, she said, she sent out an email to me and a few other people were on it. These publishers approached me about a book and wondering if anyone's interested. And I immediately was like, yes, I'm interested. And so, because I knew I had always wanted to do a book anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, yes, I'm interested. And so we did it. Long story short, I was probably maybe the only one that had time, maybe because I was a postdoc and I wasn't as busy as the other like real professionals at that point, right? So here I was, this young, eager postdoctoral student who was like, let's go. And so we linked up and we did it. And it has legs. People reference that to this day, and it opens a lot of doors for both she and I, so that we can use it as a platform to talk about the very real important issues to our communities.
Yep, I have a copy of it. I admit I haven't had a chance to read it, but then again, I bought it in a large stack of other books for on the similar subject. So it's like, okay, I got it there, and trying to run a business at the same time and read, like,
I understand.
Trying to find my rest in there so I can absorb it properly. I think that's a perfect place for us to take a break. So we'll come back in here and hear our second half here on Untying Knots. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with Dr. Jonathan Lester.
Our lives and the world around us can get messy and frustrating. Untangle and Grow Counseling's focus is to untangle that mess and make sense of it so you have a good foundation to build and grow from. Visit us on the web at untangleandgrowcounseling.com. Perry Clark offers individual psychotherapy, couples and family therapy, and adolescence therapy from a variety of coping materials and resources. Visit untangleandgrowcounseling.com for more information. You are listening to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. If you have a question or comment about our podcast, send an email to pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. That's pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. And now, back to the program.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is Perry Clark, my licensed marriage and family therapist, here with Dr. Jonathan Lester on Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. So in the break, we were just catching up a bit, and we're going to just go ahead and get into our myth and reality question, as opposed to saving for the end, because I think there's some very good points that build on that. And what do you feel is a myth and reality when it comes to mental health, and especially LGBT and same gender loving mental health in BIPOC communities?
Yeah, so I one of the things that I think is that mental health and healing in particular, because mental health is broad, but healing is something very specific.
Mm-hmm.
Self-care, anyone can do, right? We all should be taking steps towards our self-care. But healing requires an intentionality. It requires a type of sustained reflection
Mm-hmm.
that I do not think is appreciated enough in the mainstream. And when I say mainstream, I'm including mainstream Black LGBTQ same gender loving spaces. If you look at Instagram, everyone's a mental health advocate. Everyone, got looking into the camera saying, you have value, you have worth, and again, these things are important, but in a way, as a psychologist, I see those things and I'm like, it trivializes the actual work of healing. That healing. The myth is that healing is easy. Right? That if I do this, if I read this book, if I listen to this affirmation, if I listen to this person talk about attracting things to me, then that will be enough. Those things are part of it, and I don't want to disparage those things. I see healing, all hands on deck, of course, but an essential component. And again, I admit I may be biased as a therapist, as a psychologist, right? I may be biased, but to me, an essential component is that sustained, deep reflection.
The introspection.
Say again?
The introspection.
Right. That no amount of affirmations, no amount of attraction, law of attraction, meditating, no amount of vision boards, it's going to help you get. And for me, sometimes I wonder about people being distracted from true healing because they are performing what they see as the sort of pop culture version of that.
And how do you think that shows up much more for the LGBTQ and same gendering loving community?
Definitely. I mean, I was watching something the other day. I mean, because everyone's doing like these little Instagram reels, and
the TikToks,
and TikToks, and they're pointing to things and stuff. And again, no shade to any of that, but it's like you go and you look at the people who are doing them, and they're talking about mental health, and I'm like, what's your expertise, right? What qualifies you, right? And again, not to say that we don't all have a mental health story. We do. And if you want to share your mental health story, go right ahead. But there's a difference between I was depressed and this is how I started to feel better, and someone that can actually help you figure out the ins and outs and how to get to that deep place of healing. And I think sometimes we devalue that real work that is slow going, that it does require commitment, for those sort of bright, shiny voices with the followers that are talking about, here's my mental health story.
Yeah. Those are the moments that don't, shall we say, make good camera roll moments.
Exactly.
And there's so much of that has to be done. I mean, it may not be pretty. It may seriously be painful in its own way.
Exactly.
And that's not something that people think about. And as I was saying to a potential client's spouse last week, it's the week before, good therapy works because the person wants to change, not because there's an expectation from outside. to change. I mean, really, if their world is still serving them something that gives them a value to keep this maladaptive behavior going on, this destructive behavior going on, guess what? They're going to keep going. They haven't found that there's a reason that it's no longer being damaging to them. And we see this in our communities with the drug use, the maybe even the issues of how we handle money, not to mention the bad relationships. So
this performative well-being, right? And part of that is like, I'm fabulous, right? Look at me, I'm so out there with my gender expression and my sexual orientation, right? And again, there's nothing wrong with being proud of who you are. I want to be very clear about that. And there's also performance as distraction. And that is a distinct nuance. And I don't think a lot of people understand that. And my concern, again, as a psychologist, is that there are going to be LGBTQ, same gender loving Black people who don't necessarily have the role models of what the actual work looks like, or how to be healthy. And then they're going to see what is more accessible, what is given more time, these folks with the TikToks and whatnot, and they're going to think, well, I just have to be fabulous and then I'll feel better.
Or going back to the part where we spoke about in the first half, the bad bitch icon.
Exactly. As long as I'm a bad bitch, as long as I stay in formation, as long as I'm slaying, then I'm fine, then that, if I can meet that standard, then I'm good enough. If I can meet that standard, then, my self-care game will be on fleek, or I don't know if I still say fleek, but you take my point. You take my point.
Very much so.
And as you said, true healing, real healing, 9 times out of 10, there's pain involved. And you're going to feel worse before you feel better, because it requires you to wade into the pain and not just wade there, dip your toe in and okay, I get it now and move on. No, but to stay there for a little bit, to really understand, let yourself feel the texture of it.
Tread the water for a while.
That's what real healing looks like. And I think that particularly with our communities that don't have access or may not have had images and role models of what that looks like, we are grasping at those sort of shiny objects. But oftentimes those shiny objects are leading us astray because they themselves don't have the expertise and the qualifications to be giving out the information that's required, again, for true healing. Yes, we can get something out of people sharing a mental health story. Yes, we can get something out of people telling us about self-care strategies. But self-care and mental health stories and mental health advocacy is different from healing.
So true. And as you talked about this shiny, there's a part of me that I hate to say it, or at least put it in this context. There's a part of me that was thinking about, oh, here's the colonizer who walked up out of the ocean with the shiny to our ancestors and took advantage of that.
Yeah, took advantage of it. And that's the piece. My concern is how many Black LGBTQ same gender love people are being taken advantage of. And then a lot of times too, I mean, we have to be very honest. We live in a capitalistic society where it's about how many clicks you get on a video, right? And not necessarily about a genuine concern for people's mental well-being. But mental health is popular now.
Right. And to be frank, it's also in many ways under assault by capitalism.
Yes, exactly. because capitalists are coming to that content, figuring out how to monetize it.
Mm-hmm. Very much so, and it's meaning that the real work isn't going to get in there.
Mm-hmm.
I being a very much a person of sci-fi and fantasy origins and such, with everything that's happening with this aspect of the monetizing of mental health, my mind immediately jumps back to two different movies. One that was recently came out within the last 5 years. Another one that's a classic, which is Spielberg's TH 1138.
Mm-hmm.
Which in that one, there's at least two different occasions where the main character, who is white, played by Robert Duvall, is having mental health and spiritual crises. And when he goes to the chapel, and I say that with air quotes, and goes to the mental health person, and I put that in air quotes, it's a picture of Jesus that is on a tape that just continues to spills the propaganda about the power of their economic rates, and another one does the I don't understand. Can you tell me more about this? And there comes a moment where in that movie where the tape rewinds and starts over.
Wow. Yeah.
And he feels his faith falling away. The other was the one that was about within the last 5 years was the Brad Pitt Ad Astra.
Oh, I haven't seen that one.
Not going to give any spoilers, but the thing that why I bring this up is the standpoint that throughout that entire movie, any type of moment about dealing with mental health is computerized.
Wow. Yeah.
And Brad Pitt's character has figured out how to fool the computer to put himself in these situations, which normally when we're accounting for these things, there would be more clues, there'd be ideally more structural supports there. But again, I'm not going to give away the movie, but literally, anytime there is a moment where we're talking about mental health, relationships, and so forth, it's either being fed to a computer to say that you're okay to keep going to the movie, or on the mission, or here's the antidepressant you should be taking.
Yeah, yeah. And antidepressants themselves, it's feeds into capitalism, right? Again, not to say that they aren't legitimately needed and should be taken by some folks. Not to say that they can't do a world of good, because they can. So I'm going to be clear about that. And sometimes they are prescribed as a Band-Aid to keep you functional, to be a cog in this capitalist system we find ourselves in. Right?
But not actually address the wound.
Exactly. Which is the system itself a lot of times. So don't look at the system. Take this pill so that you can keep functioning. And the system's never going to change, though. The thing that's actually making you sick, it's not going to change. It reminds me of a humanistic psychologist. I forget exactly which one said this. We were talking about how sick people come from sick societies. Right? And so it's that sort of thing. But you talking about the computerized version of mental health makes me think about how the big buzz now, even in the mental health domain, is the apps.
Oh, yes.
The mental health apps, right? And so what does that mean? And I'll be honest, I'll be upfront. Before I started my private practice, I was primarily was in academia after my postdoc, but then I was like, I want to get back into clinical work. And so before I started, my private practice, I was working for one of these app-based therapy places. And it was good for me to, stick my toe back in and ease back in. But the reason why I eventually left, because I realized that I could only get to a certain point. Right.
Yep.
And again, it's not to say that there is no merit. I mean, especially for people who are therapy naive, never been in therapy, it could be a good
starter point.
Starting point. Yes, good starting point. But it's also very limited, and it is, again, does not get at that healing that people need. But all the rage is about who could create the best therapy app, how many investors we can, what's our market cap, the IPO, et cetera, et cetera. the ways in which capitalism is very, as you said, targeting psychotherapy now and mental.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Hmm. And equally, the fact that none of these things can function without us, the therapists.
Mm. Which is laughable.
Hmm.
Laughable, because that, and again, going back to Afrocentric Black psychology in particular, that's what Black psychologists understand, right? When we talk about the spirit and illumination of the human spirit, what the spirit, it's not just about here's a cognitive exercise, here's a thought exercise you could go to do
Hmm.
to replace your depressive thought with a more neutral thought. No, but it's about the energy between two humans, two physical manifestations of spirit,
Hmm.
and no app, no technology will ever be able to replicate that
Or pill.
or appeal.
And it takes on its own unique energy when dealing with LGBTQ and same gender and loving that is not going to be, again, mainstreamed.
Definitely. I mean, and especially with Black LGBTQ people, be, because we're often assaulted from so many sides. We're assaulted by racism from white LGBTQ people. We're assaulted by homonegativity and transphobia from Black heterosexual communities. That in that therapeutic space, it becomes so precious. A therapist like you and I are rare.
Hmm.
Right? What's the statistic that the American Psychological Association put out? I think 2% of psychologists are Black or something like that. And then when you go to Black LGBTQ same gender level people, you bet it's less than 0.1%, right? And
Hmm.
so, but
And even probably even smaller when you also throw in the aspect of men.
yes, 100%,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, we're
And
probably
so,
adding a couple of decimal points in there.
right, 0.000 something, yeah.
Hmm.
Um, and so I bring up those statistics and the demographics of psychologists because research has shown that people want therapists, providers that they can identify with, they believe that it's going to get them. And 9 times out of 10, that's people who they perceive to have a similar background or understanding of the background that they
Hmm.
come from. And so if we're talking about Black LGBTQ people, then who can they feel comfortable with? Who's trained to deal with their particular experiences? So,
Hmm.
and cultural humility becomes even so much more important. And the truth of
Hmm.
the matter is that even in 2022, one, we're doing a very poor job of training up and coming therapists in that regard. And two, we're doing a very poor job in training the next generations of therapists from those communities. We're doing a
Hmm.
poor job of attracting them to the field. We're doing a poor job of helping them feel welcomed in the field. And we're doing a poor job of helping them transition from students to professionals in the field. And so
Hmm.
we're as a discipline, we're doing a very poor job in general, and therefore we are not serving the communities that really need it because we do have unique issues.
Here, here. I couldn't have said it any better. So let
So,
that sink in, folks. Just let that sink in. And that's also the basis behind my first question to you is like, how did you get here?
mhm,
Because we do need more of us in the field doing this
mhm,
and doing it also for the right reasons, because
mhm.
fundamentally we're all healed too. But that's part of this continue aspect of anyone who hears this and you want to share it with somebody else who might be a very good person for this. This is why we're here.
Mhm, mhm,
This is why we want you to consider this field, and why why the variety of the first question is, how did you get here? Because you can see none of us started this path specifically going for it.
mhm.
Some of the ones that just prior to this with Dr. Langford and Dr. And Crystal Blanton, yeah, it was a family calling. But if you listen to many of my others, not all of us started there.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I definitely did not start. I definitely don't have anyone in my family that sort of I could look to for this particular path. I am first generation college student, first person in my family to become a doctor. And for me, though, it did start in childhood in that simply I did not understand the logic of my parents.
Hmm.
And bless them, and I love them, and it just, again, not to disparage them, because I would not be who I am without them, and quite frankly, I like who I am. So kudos to them. Um,
Hmm.
but I also remember feeling like my parents are always, arguing or complaining about this thing or that, but didn't they know that was going to happen? Like, why are they upset about something they knew was going to happen, right? And then couple that with my own journey of
Hmm.
feeling like something was wrong with me, because not just because I am same gender loving, but also because of I got the message that I wasn't doing male correctly.
Hmm.
So it was much more of a gender thing. Like, you should be tough, you shouldn't cry, you shouldn't do this emotional stoicism that just was not in me. But my
Hmm.
father wanted to press upon me. He was not successful, and to the gain of myself and everyone else. I'm glad he
Hmm.
wasn't successful, but he tried. And also because I was born with sickle cell anemia, and so my mental health was also um, central, or put up under the spotlight, because of the sort of existential questions
Hmm.
I was asking myself as a very sick child. So all those things sort of led me down the path of psychology and trying to understand humans.
Hmm.
And again, as I got to my understanding and my education and my research of Black psychology, understand that it goes beyond just understanding what's in the brain and logic, but also understanding the spirit.
Hmm.
And so that's how I got here. It was trying to not only understand the people around me, but trying to understand myself, and trying to understand that spiritual connection with God. And now I recognize my ancestors, but as a kid, it was God. I was raised in a Christian tradition, and trying to understand that as well, and how to make sense of that, and how to use that to again get to hold on to the purpose in the midst of, quite literally at times, being on the verge of death.
Hmm. Preach. Just preach.
Yeah.
Well, Jonathan, I think that is also a place where we're going to go ahead and end for today. Because, again, that's stuff I want people to soak in and think about as we go forward. And we need more of you out here as well. So,
Well,
where can folks. Oh,
no, I just
sorry.
want to say thank you so much for having me and allowing me to share and just talk and be in conversation and pulling this out of me with those questions. Um, because we do need to have these conversations, and people that look like us and with our backgrounds need to be having these conversations for the people that are coming up now, will come up. So,
Exactly. So, where can folks find you if they want to talk with you more and get fun, maybe give you some more ideas for the books too? Because once we get off here, there's an idea I want to put in your ear if I can.
oh, yes, I love it. I'm always looking for new ideas.
Hmm.
So you can get in touch with me on my website,
Hmm.
JonathanMLassiter.com. My first name, my middle initial M, and my last name Lassiter, JonathanMLassiter.com. People can also get in touch with me on Twitter. I'm on Instagram too, at both places.
Hmm.
Twitter, I'm a little bit more active. So Twitter and Instagram at Lassiter Health, Lassiter Health, all one word. And yeah, those are the best ways to get in touch with me. And I'm always happy to reach out. I also do a podcast. We have 2 seasons up right now. It's a visual podcast on YouTube called Fly on the Wall. It's with one of my really good friends, Marquita Moten, who is a licensed professional counselor. And we go back to college days, but she's also very much spiritually oriented in her mental health practice. She identifies as a bruja. So
Ah,
she is also bringing that aspect into the work. And she and I are having conversations, just about mental wellness for Black people. And again, understanding that spiritual wellness is a core part of that. So we're discussing all those things. So you can find us on YouTube at go to YouTube and search Fly on the Wall. So that's where people can find me.
Oh, definitely. I'm going to catch up on some of those episodes, and who knows, maybe I can come on there and we can have a three-way.
Hey, listen, I would love that. We met about, we're getting ready to do the third season, start filming next month, and then we met about what we want to do. So yeah, we'll make it happen.
Perfect. All righty. Well, Jonathan, thank you again for being here. This is Perry Clark. I'm licensed marriage and family therapist, finishing up with Jonathan Lassiter, PhD, on Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. So tune in next time, and we are going to be breaking our usual schedule for this month, for Pride Month. So you'll be getting another podcast next week as well. And stay tuned here on the Voice America Network.
Thank you for tuning in for Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Be sure to join your host, Perry Clark, for another episode on the podcast coming soon on the Voice America Empowerment Channel.